Hello, I'm Annie Graham Larkin, Executive Director of the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum. Welcome to From Mammoth Hunters to Agriculture, Pottery and Trade, the Rich Archaeology of Southern Cochise County with Hunter M. Claypatch. Thank you to our members and donors who enable the museum to provide free online programming and fulfill the organization's mission to discover history, explore Bisbee's past today. To learn how you can assist the museum in supporting its mission and programs by becoming a member or donor, please visit bisbeemuseum.org. On Thursday, May 21st through Saturday, May 23rd, the museum will host a vintage turquoise jewelry show and sale. The event features one-of-a-kind pieces of turquoise jewelry that will make a perfect addition to your collection. The Vintage Turquoise Jewelry Show and Sale will be from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. each day and is included with museum membership or general admission. All right. Hunter M. Claypatch is based in Nogales, Arizona. He received his PhD from Binghamton University in 2022 and is a specialist in ceramic analysis and the archaeology of the Arizona-Sonora borderlands. He currently serves as the president of the Arizona Archaeological Council and as a professor in the Department of Anthropology and History at Pima Community College. And if you would like to ask questions during the program today, please type your question in the Q&A chat box, and we'll gather those questions to share with our speaker. Also, a link to the program recording will be sent to all of our Zoom registrants later today. And with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Hunter Claypatch. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen right here. Is that coming up good?
It is.
Okay, great. Thank you, Annie, for the introduction, and also thank you to Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum for the opportunity to present. As an academic, I think it's very important for us to disseminate information to the wider public. And so talks like this, I think, are really, really important, and it's really exciting for me to be here today. As was mentioned, my name is Hunter Claypatch, and the title of the presentation is From Mammoth Hunts to Agriculture, Pottery and Trade, the Rich Archaeological History of Southern Cochise County. So I'm kind of going over the order of events. I'm going to actually divide this presentation into three parts. With each part I'm going to have a little bit of a break for possible Q&A, and then a larger Q&A at the end. I think that's a good opportunity to kind of break up the talk, and then also give you an opportunity to ask any questions you might have a little bit more on the spot. So the first part is really introducing who I am, the early work that's been done in Southern Cochise County, and highlighting really the people that were the inhabitants of the region in the pre-colonial period. The second part is going to be focused really on the history of what we know about the area. And this presentation is really focusing on the pre-colonial period, the period before the arrival of Europeans. So from the earliest mammoth hunters, as we'll talk about, on through really into the early 1500s. And I'm going to spotlight specific archaeological sites within the area. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to talk about every site, but some of the really, really important ones that I think are important in Southern Cochise County. And then the final part is really going to be a discussion of the Arizona Archaeological Council, which I currently serve as the president for, and other organizations that you can get involved in to learn more about the archaeological past in the area, and how you can work to as a site steward, or work to preserve the important archaeological history within Cochise County. And then from there, we'll do a little bit of time for some Q&A.
Hunter, if you could
Yeah.
speak up just a little bit.
Okay. Let me actually turn the okay. So I was born in Minnesota and have conducted archaeological research really across the Southwest United States and northern Mexico. I've done archaeological work in New Mexico, in southern Colorado, Arizona, as well as work in northern Mexico as well, including northern Sonora in particular. My PhD I received from Binghamton University, and this was research that I conducted on the trincheras tradition, which is a tradition located primarily in northern Sonora. And I looked specifically at the pottery to kind of understand how it changed through time. This was really a kind of a novel approach because very few people had given this archaeological tradition very much attention in the past. My current research is really looking at the archaeology of Santa Cruz County. I'm based in Nogales right now, and so southern Santa Cruz County is an area which has received historically, just like Cochise County, very, very little archaeological work. And so this is kind of an important area of investigation. And also in community engagement. So similar to doing presentations like this, I also do outreach with high school students, with college level students, really to kind of disseminate this kind of information. As Annie had mentioned, I have served, I'm a current professor at Pima Community College. I teach both down in Nogales at their satellite branch in Nogales, as well as the main branch up in Tucson. And am this year's president for the Arizona Archaeological Council. And I'll get in near the end of the presentation talking a little bit more about exactly what that is. So in kind of highlighting the situating the area within Cochise County, obviously the map on the top left is the modern boundaries of Cochise County. And I'm going to focus primarily on the southern portion of the county today. And in many respects, this is because it's received less attention. And sometimes I think the areas that receive less attention almost need a little bit more love. And it's an area that I think is really cool and interesting to talk about. Obviously, in these arid desert environments, being close to rivers is something that is extremely, extremely important. The San Pedro River would have been a fundamental lifeline for populations since the very, very beginning, really all through to today. As many of you know, the San Pedro actually flows from south to north, right? So the upper San Pedro is actually located in extreme northern Sonora and then flows up from there. I also, on the bottom left, I wanted to highlight the grid system that is used by Arizona State Museum for documenting sites. And the reason I mention this is because it's actually a really important tool, even if you're not a professional archaeologist, if you're just interested in archaeology, because the way the grid system works is it's a kind of a quick reference for understanding where sites are situated. So if we look at where Cochise County is, in particular southern Cochise County, much of that will be in the Arizona FF grid. And then within each of these grids, you can see that there's 16 smaller grids. So if I said to you, I'm doing archaeological work in the AZFF9 grid, you could kind of look on the map and realize, okay, that's really, really close to the border. So it's kind of an important reference for archaeologists, but I think for the wider public also to know that this is a way that archaeological sites can be discussed in a way that makes sense spatially. This is also a system that is used in Sonora as well. Centro-Ina Sonora employs the same grid system, so it works really well with these two bordering states. So in kind of highlighting the history of the area, there's two major traditions which are worthy of talking about first. And the first is, of course, the Hohokam, also known as the ancestral Atum. And this was a well-established pre-colonial tradition, really, which spans 1,000 or so years from the 400s through to about 1450. This is a tradition with considerable regional variability. So when you hear people talk about the Hohokam, it's not a monolithic or uniform cultural tradition. There's a lot of variability depending on where you're talking about, whether you're talking about the Phoenix Basin, the Tucson Basin, or anything further south, kind of entering into Cochise County. Probably the most prominent things that the Hohokam are known for are complex irrigation canal systems, which again are more common further kind of north in the region, as well as things like ball courts and ceramics, very distinctive ceramics, red on buff and red on brown ceramics. Also, shell trade and things like that. A lot of objects which are coming from the coast that reflect kind of large scale trade and interaction. And the reason I bring the Hohokam up is, as we'll talk about with southern Cochise County, there's a bit of a fusion of many cultures and cultural practices that are in the area. And it's important to kind of think about the Hohokam, the Mogollon, as I'm going to talk about, as being kind of part of a larger sphere of interaction that's happening in this area. As I mentioned, the other major tradition is the Mogollon, which was primarily located in southwestern New Mexico. This is a tradition which spans really around the same time period as the Hohokam, from the 200s, 300s, up until about 1450, or the entry of the quote-unquote proto-historic period. This is a tradition with a lot of cultural differences from the Hohokam, in particular, the kind of different plans for site configurations, but also very distinctive pottery known as Mimbres black on white, of which you can see on the bottom there. These are very, very distinctive and well-loved ceramics from the Mogollon region. In terms of the archaeology of Cochise County, there's very, very early work that was done in the region. In particular, even when the modern border was being drawn, there were various surveys, but it really wasn't until the late 1800s with Adolphe Bandelier that some of the earliest formal archaeological surveys were done. Unfortunately, these really, really early surveys did not paint the region in a particularly promising way. In fact, Bandelier, in his 1892 publication, referred to the region east of the San Pedro as, quote, dismal. And that kind of set the stage for, unfortunately, a lack of interest in the area in the subsequent decades. And it's really not until 1930 when Carl Sauer and Donald Brand conducted a survey across much of southern Arizona and northern Sonora that we started kind of understanding the value of this area for understanding the archaeological past. And they interpreted this region, importantly, as kind of a meeting place for multiple cultures. They saw that it had a lot of cultural similarities to the Hohokam, also cultural similarities to the Mogollon, and even later on, you see evidence of trade and interaction with the Casas Grandes of northern Chihuahua. And this kind of set the stage for understanding this area as a possible contact zone or frontier between some of the better studied traditions that there are. In the 1940s and 50s, the Amerind Foundation was established. And from this, throughout Cochise County, there were numerous important archaeological sites that were excavated, including Tres Alamos and one of the ones that we will talk about today, Babakamari Village, excavated by Charles de Peso in the late 1940s. Today, the majority of archaeological projects in the region take place in areas like Fort Huachuca or in the Chiricahua National Monument. This is because Section 106 is a federal policy which basically mandates archaeological work to be done anytime you have archaeological or any sort of developments that are happening on state or federal properties. Unfortunately, too, and we'll get into this near the end, a lot of Cochise County, similar to Santa Cruz County, is privately owned. And so there's been a lot of history of looting of archaeological sites and preservation of archaeological materials in this area is always a little bit of an issue. And one of the reasons that I'm going to talk near the end is because I think if there's ways that we can start trying to curb that, I think we'll all be better off. So in terms of who lived in the region, just as a very general summary, as I'd mentioned, this area is often considered this frontier zone between the Hohokam and the Mogollon, and later with evidence from the Casas Grandes region and the Salado phenomenon, which I'll touch on, really beginning in the 1300s or so with migrating populations that are coming down, bringing new ideas as well. Despite these kind of cultural influences, one of the things that makes Southern Cochise County really so interesting is that it retained its distinct local cultural practices as well, right? Southern Cochise County is obviously a very, very different environment and landscape than places like the Tucson Basin. And this required and necessitated different foodways, different adaptive strategies. You find different housing structures, you find different burial practices in this area, different pottery that's not produced by the Hohokam, that's not produced by the Mogollon, but is very, very distinctively local to the area. The region and the bottom map kind of does a nice job, and I put that together for this presentation of highlighting some of the smaller traditions that archaeologists often refer to when looking at the area of Southern Cochise County. So you have what is referred to as the San Simon tradition, which is more similar to the Mogollon, but also has a lot of cultural characteristics and overlap with the Hohokam. The Dragoon, which is fairly similar to the Hohokam, but again, local and distinct in a lot of respects. And then, of course, the Babakamari, which is located really, really much further south, and then into northern Sonora as well. So looking at these kind of, you'll see me mention these various traditions. They're often defined based on ceramics. These are all ceramics that when they were decorated were produced with red pigments. So they're red on brown ceramics that have a lot of shared designs with the Hohokam and the Mogollon, but they differ slightly depending on the time period and the specific area in which you are in. So at this point, I'd like to open up to any general questions about the archaeological work that I do, and possibly any questions regarding the very general history of archaeology in Southern Cochise County before I kind of delve into the culture history a little bit. Does anybody have any questions at this stage?
Hunter, perhaps one question that would be ideal to answer is when one stumbles upon a potential archaeological site, how should they proceed?
Yeah, and this is something that that's a really great question. And it's something I'm going to touch on near the end as well. But I think one of the things that is really important to note is that, if you find an archaeological site, if you see ceramics, if you see rock art or petroglyphs, take pictures, right? It's important. These are really wonderful things, but leave the objects in place, right? And of course, there are people that you can contact, myself included, if there's a concern that maybe this site is subject to vandalism or looting, or if you think it's maybe never been recorded before, right? Places like Arizona State Museum retain really comprehensive databases of all of the archaeological sites that have been recorded in the state, and we can check to see if this is something that in fact has never been noted before, which does happen, and that's a really wonderful thing when that happens. But
And one other question would be regarding those items that have been excavated, where are the institutions that would be the best place to see archaeological objects from Cochise County?
yeah, that's a wonderful question. Well, considering that the Ameren Museum had funded a lot of important archaeological work in the 1940s and 1950s, the Ameren Museum in Dragoon is a wonderful resource for archaeological collections, and the current curator. You can schedule appointments to look at specific collections if those are of interest to you. Arizona State Museum, as it is the state repository, also houses numerous collections as well from across the state, but especially newer work that's being done. You'll find a lot of collections that are at Arizona State Museum in Tucson as well.
Okay, it looks like that is it for the time
Cool.
being.
Cool. And if I could actually ask the people that are signed in, if you can possibly just type in the questions or comments the city or town where you live in or are tuning in from. I think this is kind of important information for me to kind of know, who's actually attending these and where everyone is from. So if you don't mind, if you're tuning in and don't mind sharing that information, that would be really wonderful for me to see when this presentation is all said and done. So moving on to the kind of second part here, which is really the culture history of Southern Cochise County. And I would be remiss to talk about Cochise County without talking about the Naco site, which is probably one of the most important archaeological sites in Cochise County. And this was an archaeological site that was actually found first by a local resident in 1951, and then Arizona State Museum came down and was excavated formally by Emil Howry the following year. And this is a super important site because this is really the first Paleoindian mammoth-kill site that was documented within the state of Arizona. So before this, there were several sites that had been documented in New Mexico, but this is the first one that was found in Arizona. And this site dates to between 11,000 and 10,000 years ago, so very, very early on. And was really important because it helped to understand and help to establish the long-held theory, which is the Clovis first hypothesis, the idea that migrants came from the Bering Strait through Alaska, through an ice-free corridor, down into the present-day United States and kind of radiated out from that area around 13,500 years ago. Now, this Clovis first hypothesis has been subject to debate in recent years. There's been evidence of even earlier sites, for example, the White Sands footprints in New Mexico and others as well that have challenged this. But the idea of kind of these large-scale mammoth hunters that were using these very large projectile points, as you can see in the image, to hunt big game and kind of basically roaming the landscape and hunting these big games kind of framed the early concept of what the populating of the Americas looked like. One of the things that makes the Naco site so special too is that instead of a normal excavation, Emil Howry and Arizona State Museum basically removed the entire matrix of the body of the mammoth within as a single block, and basically the size of the matrix that they actually extracted was the size of the truck bed that they had at the time for the excavation. So there were portions that had to be left behind, but they removed the entire soil matrix, which is really wonderful because it's still intact, and archaeologists and researchers can actually look to this, understand the soils, and ask new research questions with this. Now, the block that was taken out was actually brought to Arizona State Museum, and it is on display when the Arizona State Museum is open, which unfortunately right now it is not. It is actually one of the first things that you're greeted with when you enter Arizona State Museum is this block of the mammoth bones that are still there. And the Clovis projectile points, they put replicas of the original ones, are all in there, and you can kind of look around them and find where all 8 of the projectile points have been located. So it's a really, really wonderful site. It's not the only site. Murray Springs and a couple of other sites in southern Cochise County are also very, very old, but this one is really kind of the most famous because it was really the first in Arizona and really demonstrated the early occupation in the area. In terms of the Archaic period, which is a period which spans from about 8,000 years ago until about 2,000 years ago, this is a period where there's a lot of transitions that are happening. There's changes in climate. It's generally much wetter at that time period. There's new plants, new animals, new resources that are available to people that start gradually prompting a more sedentary lifestyle. And with this, around 4,000 years ago, corn enters southern Arizona for the first time. Some of the earliest dates that we have are from the Tucson Basin and from northern Sonora as well. And this really changes kind of the entire dynamics of lifeways for populations that are living along areas like the San Pedro, because you can have and harvest reliable sources of food. We don't know exactly when corn entered the southern Cochise County. We're kind of dependent a little bit on information that we have from some of the better studied areas like the Tucson Basin, but we can assume that around 4,000 years ago, it's kind of gradually entering the area. It's probably not overnight changing the lifestyles of people. They're probably gradually integrating it into their diet. Maybe uh, over time, some people are more consciously planting it and trying to utilize it for different types of resources. But that exact transition is a little bit unclear because we haven't excavated a lot of archaic period sites in the area. Some of the best sites that we actually have come from Fort Huachuca. And actually, in Fort Huachuca, there was a large survey in the late 80s and early 90s, which documented over 300 archaeological sites. And many of those have archaic period components, mostly dating from the middle and late archaic period, of which probably the most prominent is the site that I referenced at the bottom called Blacktail Canyon. And this is a late archaic period site. So this is a site that's roughly 4,000 to 2,000 years old, located in Fort Huachuca. And it was very expansive. So across about 25 acres, this seems to have been an area that people were returning to. This would have been an ideal spot for intensive plant use. There's evidence of roasting pits. There's evidence of fire pits. So people seem to have kind of continued returning to this area and kind of started more intensively utilizing the landscape. And this being kind of one of the bigger archaeological sites that we have from the late Archaic in southern Cochise County. I put up as well some of the various points that you have from the Archaic at Fort Huachuca. Later on, kind of during the period where there's the entry of corn into the area, you start getting very stylistic and uniform ceramic, projectile points, which are produced really across southern Arizona and northern Sonora, referred to as the San Pedro, the Cienega, and the Empire points as well. During the early formative period, we see the entry, which the early formative begins really around 100 or 200 CE, so about 1,800 years ago. We see the entry of planeware ceramic technology into southern Arizona, into northern Sonora. We don't know exactly, again, when this happened within southern Cochise County, but we believe it was probably around 300 or so AD. And the reason we think that it was around this time is it is around that time also where you start to see the earliest planeware ceramics, undecorated ceramics produced in southwestern New Mexico. And considering that the earliest ones are coming from the Arizona-Sonora borderlands, we think that it's kind of radiating from this. But this is an area where more investigations would really be helpful moving forward. This is also not unique to southern Cochise County. We know that early ceramics were produced, for example, in southern Santa Cruz County, but we don't have the dates or the archaeological materials necessary to fully confirm exactly when that happened. The chronology for really actually for southern Cochise County is largely based on excavations at San Simon Village that was excavated by Sales in the 1940s. And there's some issues with this chronology, and I'm not going to get too much into it, but part of the problem is, of course, San Simon Village is north of southern Cochise County. And so there's regional differences that are happening. But it's also the chronology that he formed using the ceramics has been subject to critique over the years as well. So, you know, again, another kind of area where we kind of we have information, but we're trying to always kind of grow and learn more and more. The Garden Canyon Village site is a very prominent site, and it's a site that was actually occupied for a very long period of time. In fact, some of the more intensive occupations are happening in the 11 and 1200s. But it's an important site in particular, and the reason I'm mentioning it now is because during the early formative, we see evidence of early occupation there. We see evidence of some of the earliest decorated ceramics from southern Cochise County, in particular, a ceramic type known as Dos Cabezas, red on brown. And what you see with this really early pottery, and it's cool, you see this with early ceramics that are produced in southern Arizona and New Mexico as well, is they're often these very simple, kind of thick, broad lines, right? This is not the period where they're making really complex anthropomorphic imagery. They're making very simple designs on their pottery, and that makes sense, right? When you're talking about the earliest decorated ceramics, right? It doesn't make sense that they're going to start super complicated early on, and so this is a really cool site for that. There's been some the Garden Canyon Village site was really intensively excavated in the 1960s, and there's actually some evidence that some of the earliest occupations still remain to be excavated. So it's possibly an important area for future researchers to look at. During the middle formative, we find a period where the local traditions are starting to become increasingly influenced by the Tucson and the Phoenix Basin with the Hohokam, as well as the Mogollon as well. So it seems like these traditions are kind of rising in prominence. There's kind of new trade networks which are entering the area, and this is starting to influence the area of Cochise County as well. We start to see the early evidence of Mimbres black on white pottery really entering around 800. And then we start to see evidence for possibly Hohokam-like architecture, in particular Hohokam-like ball courts, which occur at sites like Leslie Canyon and possibly at Potttown as well in southern Cochise County. Now, these ball courts in the Hohokam region are interpreted as being kind of areas where there would have been communal gatherings, ball games that would have been taking place as well. We don't know exactly what these were being used for, how similar they were used in Cochise County. In particular, the one from Potttown has never been excavated, so it's based on kind of the size and the surface depression that people think it is a possible ball court, but there's a lot of questions that we don't have. But these new influences not only result in new trade items coming in, but they also start to impact the local community and some of the ways that people are doing things like interring their deceased. So in the Hohokam region, there's the common practice of cremating the deceased and often placing the cremated remains within vessels. Inhumations are more common in the Mogollon region. And what you see during this time period, during the middle formative in Cochise County, is really kind of a mixture and an amalgamation of these practices, which suggests that some areas are taking more, borrowing more cultural commonalities with the Mogollon region, and some are borrowing more from the Hohokam. We also see that architectural styles are different as well. You get in some areas you get Hohokam like pit structures. In the other areas, you have more rectangular structures like that are more common in the Mogollon region. And what's super cool is that this seems to vary, not even necessarily on a large scale. You'll find even at a site or even household level, sometimes these distinctions are being made, and they presumably are reflective on the identities of the local inhabitants of the area, and who they kind of take identity from, and how they reflect themselves and who they are. I put up the site Las Chivas, which is a site actually in northern Sonora, kind of as much as anything, which dates to the middle formative, because I think it's important to remind ourselves, of course, that while I'm kind of talking in a very contemporary sense, using southern Arizona, using southern Cochise County as a boundary marker, of course, these areas, these boundaries would have been irrelevant to pre-colonial populations. And there's a rich archaeological history just south of the international border, which closely mirrors what we see in southern Cochise County as well. And I think it's always kind of important to remind ourselves that people would have always been kind of moving around throughout these areas. One of the sites from the middle formative that is worthy of talking about is the site of Potttown. This is the one that has a possible ball court, but is somewhat debated because it's never actually been ground truth. This site, in fact, aside from a very small 5x5 excavation unit, this site is really primarily known only from surface surveys in the 1960s. There are, however, does however seem to be a quite a large site, and in particular, there's a lot of trash mounds which seem to be concentrated in kind of in the southeastern portion of the site. There's evidence for plant processing camps a little bit further away. So there would have been a lot of agricultural activity. There would have been a lot of kind of more permanent settlements that would have been going on in this area. And the possibility of a Hohokam-like ball court, suggests that it's kind of getting integrated within kind of a larger social network. The diagnostic pottery is very distinctively local. The vast majority of it is local, kind of associated with the Dragoon and the San Simon tradition, which I had kind of touched on earlier. But you also get a pretty high percentage, about 18%, of pottery from the Phoenix Basin. So Hohokam pottery from the Phoenix Basin. So this seems to have been a site which kind of was regionally prominent as well, and the people that were in the area were able to obtain objects which were from considerable distances. When you think about the distance from present day Phoenix to southern Cochise County, that's a pretty far distance. And to consider that a very large percentage of the decorated pottery is coming in from that region, I think is really interesting. There's also a site. This is actually a kind of a part of a larger site known as the Fairbank Town site. And this was a really, really prominent site. In particular, I mentioned the value of rivers and water. This site is located right at the confluence of the San Pedro and the Babocamari River. So both of those kind of areas, right there together, was a really ideal location for a large site. This site was identified very, very early on, but actually recently was excavated by, or a large portion of it was excavated by desert archaeology. And again, there's a lot of evidence of pit houses that were excavated. So these were habitation dwellings. People were living in this area. Again, you have an interesting mixture of cremation practices, which is more Hohokam-like, and inhumation practices, which is more Mogollon-like. So really kind of highlighting this fluid area of ideas and innovations. Ceramics and radiocarbon dates suggest that the site had a pretty long occupation, probably most intensively occupied from 800 to 1100. And one of the things that I think is interesting is the ceramicist who looked at these, Smith, She basically, instead of trying to use the poorly defined ceramic types that are used in southeastern Arizona, she instead focused on the design styles themselves and how they resemble what you see in the Hohokam region. So in the bottom right, you'll see that there's this rincon, Sakatone style design on local ceramics. So rincon, Sakatone style, this is something that would have been produced between about 950 to about 1100 in the Tucson area. Now, there are some problems with trying to incorporate the design aesthetics of one region into another, because of course we don't necessarily know if these trends became popular at the exact same time. Often is the case, right? Trends, rise in popularity in one area before they rise in another. So there is some risk with it, but I think it was kind of a interesting and novel approach that she took. I also really love this unusual elongated bowl. One thing that I've noted also working in near Nogales and Rio Rico area is that these kind of longer bowls, which are uncommon really elsewhere, seem to be kind of a common thread among kind of the early borderland inhabitants. So the late formative, which is the last period that I'm going to kind of delve into, is a period that's really locally organized into the early and late Animus phase. So kind of from about 1150 to 1450. This is a period where there's a lot of change that's happening across the southwestern United States and northern Mexico. People are migrating. People are from areas. There's a period of considerable drought, especially in northern Arizona. People are migrating to the south. People are aggregating together and forming larger communities. So this is a time period where it seems like population density really starts to grow and increase, and not just local population density, right? These are migrants coming in, bringing in new ideas, new innovations, and things like that. And what we see is that during the late 12, early 1300s, Cochise County is really kind of at the center of a lot of interaction with migrants who are coming from the Cayenta region, kind of northern Arizona, kind of migrating down, bringing what is known as the Salado phenomenon, and then the Casas Grandes tradition. And one of the things that is interesting about these two traditions or phenomenon that we're seeing is there's a strong tendency for pottery that's very bright, very flashy, and has multiple colors. So they're polychromes, and it seems like during this time period, the need to have bright, flashy pottery becomes increasingly important, kind of as a way of signaling, "Hey, I'm part of your group. We're kind of part of this same kind of system." It starts to take off, and as I'll show you on the next slide, local potters start kind of mimicking these styles as well. I've got another example, a Sonora example as well. Villaverde. This is a really large regional center, presumably just south of the international border in the Upper San Pedro. Super cool site. Again, kind of reminding you that that's these populations knew no borders. When I mentioned the kind of the desire for flashy pottery, this is kind of what I'm talking about. And one of the ways that this locally manifests is through two kind of poorly defined ceramic types, which are known as Babacamari polychrome and Santa Cruz polychrome. And these are interestingly, these have a lot of aesthetic commonalities with pottery from the Salado region, for pottery from the Casas Grandes area, but are also incorporating local styles, local designs. They're also incorporating Hohokam-like aesthetics and designs as well. And these are really, really cool ceramics. I'm actually have a paper under review with Thatcher Seltzer Rogers specifically on Santa Cruz polychrome because it's a ceramic type that was first defined back in the 1930s, and nobody's really given it that much look or love or attention, and it's something that I think is really special for the Borderlands area. So one of the three sites I'm going to kind of quickly touch on is the first one is Boss Ranch, and this is a site which is located fairly close to the New Mexico border and was excavated by Cochise College back in the 1980s. And this is a site that seems to have a couple of components, both straddling the early and late Animas phase. So this is a period again where there's a lot of those new innovations, new ideas that are coming in. Some people have suggested that maybe this site was actually only periodically occupied, and they've looked at the animal remains to suggest that this might have been a pretty fragile ecological environment, and that maybe it was abandoned. There was a hiatus before it was reoccupied again. It's a little hard to tell based on the amount of work that's been done in the area. But the things that you do know and see is that the ceramics that we're getting from the area definitely reflect integration into trade networks. The Salado, as well as from the Casas Grandes region, those are vessels. The bottom left one is an example of Ramos polychrome from the Casas Grandes region in Chihuahua, and then the other being an example of a Salado-like ceramic type. So these are obviously very, very bold, vivid ceramic types, which would have been really, really important in this time period of dynamic change. One of the things that I really like about the Boss Ranch site is that there were actually two decorated Trincheras tradition sherds found there. And the Trincheras tradition I mentioned very, very early on is located in northern Sonora. And these, to my knowledge, this is actually the northeastern or the easternmost occurrence of Trincheras tradition pottery found in the area. You don't find Trincheras pottery very much in southern Cochise County. You find it much more in southern Santa Cruz County. So it's kind of interesting to see that it made its way out there, even though it's kind of far out of its normal radius. The other site, which was really prominently excavated by Charles de Peso and the Amarin Foundation in the late 1940s, is Babocamari Village. And this site was primarily occupied later on. It had an evidence of many structures. So there were kind of this overall site configuration, 42 houses. These are primarily rectangular, but were kind of centered around circular compounds, which is kind of unusual for other parts of the southwestern United States. Many cremated remains, so the kind of a high tendency for cremated individuals concentrated in specific areas, almost like mini cemetery areas. What is not surprising as well, you get a high frequency of Salado and Casas Grandes pottery, but also that local Babocamari polychrome that I had mentioned. In fact, it's from the Babocamari village where Babocamari polychrome was first kind of well defined. It was known back in the 1930s, but it was first well defined from excavated contexts at Babocamari village. And the final site is known as Slaughter Ranch. And this is, again, a late Animas phase site excavated, reported on in the early 1970s. And this was actually a fairly, even though there was some heavy looting that occurred at this site, there was still evidence of standing adobe walls from this. And part of that is because it was a later occupied site. 22 rooms were defined. One of these rooms is thought to have evidence of an enclosure for a parrot. There were remains that were found within that house, although they're kind of inconclusive as to what the animal actually was. The use of kind of enclosures for exotic animals is something that you see elsewhere, in particular in northern northern Chihuahua and southern New Mexico. So this would be kind of an interesting case where it kind of enters southern Cochise County. Um, there's one of the things that's kind of really interesting about this site is you get a lot of Salado and Casas Grandes pottery, which is not locally produced, and fairly little or fairly few quantities of local Babacamari or Salado pottery or Santa Cruz pottery, which suggests that the people that are living in this area and occupying this space would have had to have been pretty well integrated right into wider trade networks to get a high frequency of kind of exotic items. The parrot itself is kind of a good indicator, if it in fact is a parrot, is kind of a good indicator of this as being a pretty fancy kind of highfalutin site for its time period. So at this note, I mean, I'd like to open up if you have questions or comments for me before I do a kind of a very brief discussion of the Arizona Archaeological Council and things like that to wrap things up.
All right. Sharon asked, what is the term intrusive used in describing the ceramics? She's
Yeah,
not familiar with it in an archaeological sense.
yeah, no, that's great. So I mean, we often refer to pottery that is not local. So if it's coming in from an outside context, it's intrusive within the context of the assemblage. So when I mentioned the Casas Grandes ceramics, which would have been produced in Chihuahua, they occur in southern Cochise County, but you know they occur as intrusive ceramics.
And those items found on federal land, such as Fort Huachuca,
Yeah.
where do they typically go? Do they stay regionally, such as the University of Arizona, or are they shipped off to a federal building somewhere?
Usually, the with Fort Huachuca, I'm not entirely sure. Many places like Fort Huachuca have, for example, like White Sands, have small music curation facilities themselves. I'm not 100% sure about Fort Huachuca, but presumably the majority of them are going to Arizona State Museum. In terms of it's especially with laws and regulations regarding the movement of artifacts, it's generally pretty uncommon for things to move outside of state boundaries if it was a formally excavated archaeological site.
And the next question, are there any interesting differences between the Leonard mammoth site and the Naco mammoth site?
I don't. I mean, to my knowledge, if I'm not mistaken, the Leonard Mammoth site, I mean, was recorded later on. I don't actually have a good answer for that one. The Naco one kind of set the stage really for discussion and is kind of the most famous. But it is certainly not the only one.
And here is a fantastic question.
Okay.
How can I get more involved in archaeological discovery in my area? I'm thinking about classes at Cochise College and have a passion for archaeology in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can maybe hold off that response until you know until the final part, because I think I'm going to kind of touch on that a little bit as well. But certainly, yeah, attending community college is a wonderful thing. I know that Cochise College had a great program, as I'd mentioned. You know, even conducting really important archaeological work, right, to better understand the community that we live in. But yeah, I'll touch on that a little bit more on the final part here.
And we'll do one last question.
Great.
Um, it it is actually from me. So
Oh,
I have heard in the past that the Hohokam were the people who vanished. And what does modern research tell us?
yeah. So I think that I mean I refer to the Hohokam at the beginning as the Hohokam or ancestral Autumn. And by all accounts, by indigenous perspectives, by archaeological research, the Hohokam really are the ancestral population of the modern O'odham today. There is some confusion or lack of clarity archaeologically exactly how this happened. As I mentioned, in the 1400s, there's a lot of migrations that are going on. People are moving around, and exactly how those ancestral populations formed and created and established the earliest kind of definable populations that are recorded by Father Kino in the 1600s is the sort of some discussion. Folks like Denny Seymour have done kind of a lot of interesting work delving into that. But I think by all accounts, the populations that are the Hohokam and the Trincheras tradition, for that matter, that I study in northern Sonora are the ancestral populations of those who are still living in the Sonoran Desert.
Well, we do have a couple more, but the cues that you've given, I think they might be more appropriate for after your next segment.
Sure. And if we've got a little time, I'm happy to field questions as well, kind of broader questions at the very, very end. Um, so yeah, the final part is really kind of talking about Arizona Archaeological Council, which I currently serve as the president for, and other organizations, and how you can kind of get more involved. So hopefully answering that question, but I'm also happy to answer it in a little bit more detail at the end as well, if there still are questions. So the Arizona Archaeological Council is it's a nonprofit volunteer association, really with the goals of trying to develop professional archaeology within Arizona. So this is I serve as president. I don't get paid for this or anything like that. Um, Beyond kind of trying to uplift early and emerging professional archaeologists, trying to do educational outreach, advocacy work to really kind of try to learn what the latest policies are, especially government policies that are kind of changing, and trying to disseminate that to the wider public. In terms of what the AAC does, there's mentorship programs where emerging academics can work with professional archaeologists kind of on a one-on-one basis. Kind of skill sets for transitioning students to actually a field or a career in archaeology. Right, one of the important things is that people learn archaeology as a skill set in the college setting, for example. But how do you take those skills that you learned in the school and then actually apply them to the job field? This is something that the AAC is really devoted to. Research grants, often research grants that are targeting young academics. So we have the Doug Craig Memorial Research Grant, which funds several academics a year, basically conducting new and novel research, or even helping with travel fundings, right? Because travel to things like conferences or to look at collections is becoming increasingly expensive, and it's a hard thing to do. There's also a published peer-reviewed journal, the Journal of Arizona Archaeology, which is available online. It's as soon as it's published, it's available to members, but also is the older editions are free and accessible through the Arizona Archaeological Council website as well. And I put up, if you're interested in certainly in being a member or kind of learning more about the AAC, I put the website there. I also want to highlight too that the Arizona Archaeological Council, one of the things that it does is it hosts a fall conference every year. And normally it kind of bounces around. Last year it was in Tucson. The year before it was up in Phoenix. And for the first time, it's going to be in Nogales, which is where I live. And this is a really cool conference, I think, because it's accessible. It's free and open to the public, and is really an opportunity for, if you're interested in archaeology, if you're interested in learning more, it's a great place to kind of sit, meet academics, and talk. There's going to be, we're going to have speakers that are really experts across Arizona as well as northern Mexico as well. Nogales part of the reason that I picked it was because I really wanted it to be a place and an opportunity for academics from northern Mexico to come as well. If you're actually an archaeological researcher, the registration for submitting abstracts is open. The registration for actually attending is going to come out in a couple of months, really kind of after the abstracts are finalized. But again, it's free and open to the public, and I would love to have Cochise County presence at this conference as well. Beyond, the Arizona Archaeological Council, I did kind of want to mention a couple other really, really wonderful organizations. Archaeology Southwest, which has a pretty prominent presence. It's based in Tucson, really aims for public outreach. They have a wonderful kind of full color magazine that they publish, and is a really wonderful resource, not just for people that are kind of interested in learning a little bit about archaeology, but for academics as well. I mean, the people that are publishing and writing in these in Archaeology Southwest are scholars in the field, and are presenting information in a way which is easily digestible to the wider public, and that's really important. They also give in-person and Zoom talks as well, so checking them out is a really great thing. Old Pueblo Archaeology Center, also based in Tucson, does a lot of educational outreach. They also give tours of archaeological sites. So, if you're interested in visiting archaeological sites, particularly in southern Arizona, Al Dart, who's the head of Old Pueblo, has done a really wonderful job of kind of organizing tours and making archaeology accessible to the wider public. They have talks with professional archaeologists, which they regularly post on YouTube. I did a talk with Old Pueblo, I think back in December, so there's a YouTube video there. But yeah, kind of making this stuff as accessible as possible. And then finally, the Amarant, which is based in Dragoon, I've mentioned has done a ton of really, really important work, serves as a repository for a lot of these important archaeological sites that I've talked about, but also are really engaged in trying to do professional development for academics. They hosted a really wonderful binational conference or gathering in Hermosillo a couple of years ago that I attended, really with archaeologists from both sides of the border, kind of organizing an academic think tank. They also fund academic research projects. I was based there for a few months this past summer. And so, looking at archaeological collections, I mean, they're really wonderful. And they have a speaker series as well that is also available on YouTube. So if you guys are interested in archaeology, checking these places out, watching some of the videos, I mean, these are great ways to learn more and more about the past. One thing that I did want to mention too is, of course, archaeological sites are everywhere in southern Arizona, in Cochise County and Santa Cruz County. But vandalism and looting is certainly an ongoing problem. And of course, while there's laws and policies within the United States protecting archaeological sites and artifacts, it's not always easy to enforce, right? Police or other officials aren't always present at archaeological sites 24/7. And one of the things that I really want to kind of highlight is of course, looting is something, and I think it's important to instill in the wider community, right? Looting is beyond being a crime, is fundamentally it deprives people from appreciating the past, right? If you take the past away from other people, they can't appreciate it, right? And archaeologists can't study it. The past is one of these resources which does not renew itself, right? When I talk about this amazing pottery from the Casas Grandes region that's found in southern Cochise County, right? If you take that away, right, it's not like it's going to replenish itself, and it's important to make sure that it's protected. And as I mentioned at the beginning, right, I mean, if you stumble upon, a site or artifacts, don't hesitate to take pictures, right? I mean, this stuff is wonderful, and it's important that we make connections with these spaces, but don't remove the objects from where they're found, and make sure that it can be appreciated by future generations. I put the website, the savehistory.org, is a really wonderful website that kind of highlights kind of things that you can do for preserving the past, and why the past is worthy of preservation to begin with. And the last kind of thing that I have is in terms of preservation of archaeology is something that kind of how you can get involved in through preservation archaeology. And obviously, like I said, I'm one of the only professional archaeologists in Santa Cruz County, right? I can't be at all archaeological sites at all times. I also teach, right? And so one of the things that I think is important is that the preservation of archaeological sites is something that requires teamwork, right, and requires collaboration. And one of the things that we know from research is that informed communities often retain deeper connections to the places they occupy, right? If you know about the archaeology of southern Cochise County and care about it, and know about the history, you're going to be less likely to vandalize it, right? Because you appreciate it and you care about it and you love it. And so I think that part of me doing public talks like this is also to raise appreciation, right, for the history and the culture of the areas that we occupy. The Arizona Site Steward Program is really a wonderful program that partners with various institutions like the Forest Service, State Lands, BLM, to really train people, everyday people, not professional archaeologists, but everyday people, on how to protect archaeological sites, how to do things like formally report destruction and vandalism. And this is a really wonderful program. I can say, working in living in Santa Cruz County, we need more site stewards, right? We need more people that are knowledgeable about the archaeological past, and want to take stands to advocate for preserving. So on that note, I'm happy to open it up to any other questions you have. I also left my email up here. Feel free to reach out. There's my Pima Community College email, but I also the AAC president email as well. Does anybody have questions?
And just as a reminder to our guests, if you could type in the Q&A the community in which you live. If I know you, if we personally know each other, there's no need to do that. I will provide that information to Hunter. This helps organizations demonstrate their reach within the communities they serve to things like granting organizations. And so it's not just out of curiosity,
Sure.
well, I'm sure some curiosity, that Hunter is asking for this information, but you will truly help preserve and communicate information about our region's archaeological history by doing so, something that
Yeah.
simple.
No, absolutely, yeah, and thank you for the reminder as well. And one thing that I think is really important to note, and I'm sure a lot of you know this, unlike places like Tucson or Phoenix, extreme southern Arizona often doesn't get visited by professional archaeologists who are interested in kind of disseminating the information to the wider public. So kind of knowing who the audiences are, and things like that is something that's really important for organizations like the Arizona Archaeological Council, and other organizations as well. So I appreciate if you can share that information.
All right. And Sharon asked, is there someone specifically who should be contacted if I or anyone come across items that are considered or might be considered artifacts?
Yeah, I mean, the question, the initial question would be where exactly they're being located, right? If we're talking about artifacts that are on private land, on state or federal land, right? Those get to be different kind of discussions a little bit. But I would say that as one of the few professional archaeologists in southern Arizona, I am happy to be kind of a contact person. And because I work regularly with Arizona State Museum on kind of everything from very sharing of general information to things like formal repatriation of artifacts and remains and stuff like that. So I'm happy to be a contact for you, even though I don't live in Cochise County. I visit it regularly, and I'm not too far. I'd be happy to be that contact person.
And regarding the council, um, what kind of educational opportunities do they offer to their members or the public? Of course, beyond, yeah, speaker series as today.
Yeah, no, I mean that's and the speaker series is actually something that I kind of brought up as something that I wanted to do as president. It varies a little bit, and one of the things that I like about the Arizona Archaeological Council is it's very dynamic. So the presidency is a 1 year term, and so every year, kind of the new current president brings different interests, and obviously me being in southern Arizona, right? That's why the conference takes the flair of being in Nogales, and my outreach is focused in this way as well. One of the things that's done often is workshops that are done with. I know last year there were a series of workshops that were done really with hands for hands-on working with how do you identify ceramics or how do you identify stone tools, things that we're all kind of interested in, but how do you actually have that skill set and that basic knowledge, kind of working on things like public workshops. There's also a much more informal public gatherings that there was one just held in Phoenix. There's going to be another one. Well, has to be formally scheduled, but it's going to be in Tucson next month, where people kind of get together, right? Both professional and avocational archaeologists or people that are just interested in kind of getting together at common spaces to talk about archaeology and to ask questions and to kind of be in spaces where knowledge and ideas are flowing. So there's a lot of different things that happen. And for more information, I definitely would suggest you check out the website, because depending on who you are and what your interests are, I think there's many different options that the AAC helps to accommodate.
And we'll do one last question.
Sure.
Um, do you know which archaeological sites in Cochise County are open to the public?
That's really good question. And that's something that I would be happy to follow up, Annie, actually with you on this. This is something that I intended to kind of have before this presentation. Yeah, that's something that I'd be happy to follow up on, because as I'm not a resident of Cochise County, it's a little bit harder for me to know, but I'd be happy to delve into that a little bit more, because I'm curious myself.
All right. Well, Hunter, this has been an absolutely fantastic program. Thank you so much for spending your Saturday in the middle of probably grading finals and submitting grades.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
absolutely. Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody who tuned in, and Annie, thank you for kind of giving me this opportunity, because it was really a pleasure.
And thank you to our audience for joining us today. And we will see you next month. We do have an online program on the calendar. I believe it will be June 13th, where we'll be talking about the art of Effie Anderson Smith. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye bye.